The Spinoff Podcast Network.
Are you making the most of your KiwiSaver investment? Generate is an award-winning KiwiSaver provider with a track record of strong long-term performance. Making a smart decision now could add tens of thousands of dollars by the time you reach retirement. Book a no-obligation chat with a Generate KiwiSaver advisor today at generatekiwisaver.co.nz/get-advice. A copy of the product disclosure statement is available at generatekiwisaver.co.nz. The issuer of the scheme is Generate Investment Management Limited, and of course, past performance does not guarantee future returns.
I'm Toby Manhire, and this is Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour government. A podcast in 6 parts.
Doesn't give my opponents much time to run up to an election, does it?
This nation is at risk.
What do you think you're up to now, you perverted little liar?
I could smell the uranium on it as you lean towards the
most radical overhaul in the history of New Zealand's administration.
Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour government. Made with the support of New Zealand On Air. Listen now on the Spinoff or wherever you get your podcasts.
Kia ora rā, e te iwi kei te whakarongo koutou kia Gone By Lunchtime, ko Annabelle Lee tēnei. Kia ora, Ben, kei te pēhea koe?
Hey.
Very good. Duncan, kei te pēhea koe?
Kia ora, Annabelle.
Kia ora rā. Now, I'm hosting today because Toby has been called away to Whananaki to help facilitate the negotiations between New Zealand First and, of course, the two runners-up in last night's election. We're going to be talking about all the big issues this week, and one in particular. But before we get to Kylie Jenner's pregnancy, we'll start off with the election night results. Ben, you were at TV1.
I was part of the social media coverage, which played where the ads would be in the TV coverage if you were streaming online.
Because people stream TVNZ, like that's what they do.
I had a big audience in friends of mine living in the UK following the New Zealand election, and literally no one else. And what I was I arrived at TVNZ and walked past all the people who were on the TV panel. A few ex-colleagues of mine, some former National Party presidents, Mike Williams, and then set up where they were all sitting. There was a couch with its back to the back of that couch, and they were like, just sit here.
Seems appropriate.
Did they have better catering than you?
I managed to get pretty drunk.
Good.
Yeah, so kudos to TVNZ.
Was it kind of an angry, like, I'm better than this drunk, or was it just a convivial, I'm having a good time drunk?
Hey, look, any opportunities I'm offered is a pleasure and an honour, and I'm just thankful for the Coronas and for the democratic franchise.
Was it craft beer or just Coronas?
It wasn't craft beer. It was sort of premium beer. You know, like TVNZ's largesse, thanks to the sort of excesses of the Ralston years. I think its excesses got frozen around sort of 2005 when kind of Heineken was sort of in, and that's what everybody was like drinking on Ponsonby Road.
It's just paused. It's forever in that era. Eh?
Yeah.
So Coronas without the lemon and that sort of...
Yeah.
No lemons. That's an extravagance too far. How about you, Annabelle? How was... you were on TV3, which felt like a lot of the night.
I was at TV3, yeah, and the highlight of my night was getting to be in makeup with Linda Clark and getting to, like, fangirl her up close and personal for a couple of hours, which was fantastic. But, yeah, no, we had good fun at TV3, so they had us on the TV panel, and then during the off-air times they chucked us on Radio Live with Mark Sainsbury and Chris Trotter, and yeah, it was good fun.
Oh, what? So you were like going full time?
We were
just
multi-platforming.
Whoa.
Yeah, it was very impressive. But yeah, good night there, good night at 3, and Duncan and Paddy were beside themselves with excitement, and Lisa did a great job, and yeah, it was fun.
Nicely handled.
Yeah.
How was the spin-off?
Spinoff was freaky. So I was alongside Toby, and I'd kind of in my head imagined us just kind of writing these 200-300 word takes as little things became clear. and instantly froze. Like I basically just became this, like, you know, one of those water birds that just kind of dips its head into a glass of water. I'm going out on a Ben Thomas analogy here. It's going to go badly. But all I did was just refresh the Electoral Commission's electorate page. I just got stuck in that loop of just scanning the electorate races, which was really fun, but also just a totally bizarre and narrow way to experience the election.
That's exactly what I did. As soon as those first results started flowing through about Waiariki, I just got sucked into the vortex of the election results website and just kept pinging straight away between Te Tai Tokerau, Te Tai Hauaru, Waiariki, and watching it unfold. And wow, I was very surprised by not shocked, but surprised by the result there. Certainly.
It's really interesting. Under MMP, it's removed a lot of the suspense of election nights. Totally. Because, you know, once you get to 15% of the vote, it's basically stuck for the rest of the night. Even at 1 or 2%, you really sort of see the shape that it's taken. We called it at 7:05. And
Toby was out on a limb with 2% in. And we were getting ridiculed on Facebook, but it was basically right. You know, you had basically a representative sample, and it moved a little, but not a lot.
That's right, and there were tweets coming out from the Labour camp saying, like, our data and analysts are looking at it, and we project a final 44-39 result. And you're like, come on, like, you're going to be found out in 2.5 hours. Like, there's no need to spin.
I really want to see the face of your data analysts.
You do have some seats, though, where it swings all night. Like, I remember last time in Te Tai Tokerau in 2014, it literally swung between Calvin and Hone all night, and it wasn't until the end that Calvin pulled away. And this time I was watching Northland, and Northland was really interesting during the night because there were times when Winston was actually coming third, and Willow Jean was coming second. So, and then, you know, Winston would come back out front again and then drop back down, and love those seats.
Yeah, the electorates are interesting because the way the polling booths come in, right, and they sort of come in bunches, and you had a similar thing in Hutt South where Chris Bishop and Jenny Anderson were sort of pinging around. But,
and early on there was a lot of excitement that in East Coast, you know, people thought that Kitty Tapu Allen was going to depose Ann Tolley, but then, you know, it comes back to that traditional kind of narrative where it's those small rural booths get reported first, and then the big urban booths come in. So we saw, for instance, in Epsom, Paul Goldsmith was leading David Seymour early on as the small rural booths in Epsom, like the golf clubs were reported, and then those tight urban centres came in and tipped the balance.
Even Mana, actually. Mana was like that too. For a while, National were ahead of Chris Farfoy and Mana. A little bit more excitement, but then it all, as you say, after the urban vote comes in, it all evens out. So what did you guys think of the speeches on election night?
I thought they were... I found them quite interesting. I liked how embittered Gareth Morgan was. I just enjoy that generally as like a kind of running theme of the election. I thought James Shaw was like a bit too excited for a 5.8, and I thought Jacinda Ardern actually like absolutely smashed the general tone of, you know, like managing to be sort of not necessarily magnanimous, I don't know if that's the right word, but I thought, you know, because they didn't win, you know, like it was an amazing result, yet it wasn't a victory, and it was 10 points, and I thought she handled that really well. I know that there were some people who felt like she should have been more kind of rousing and it shouldn't have had the feel of a concession, but you do have to concede that you lost the election, which doesn't necessarily mean you won't be Prime Minister. I thought she walked that line well. And then Ben Billings was kind of cute, you know, like, regardless of what you think of him, for someone who was just so humbled and beaten and broken in 2002, for him to be back up, it is a kind of an extraordinary redemption story, and I you know, he kind of channeled the emotion pretty well.
I thought look, everyone was winners on the night. Not everyone, obviously. Some terrible losers. But in terms of both Bill English and National, you know, obviously a huge personal victory for English himself. The pundits and the commentators, myself included, have all sort of praised English as, you know, he really was the franchise for National during this campaign. The fact that he had the economic credibility personally attached to him meant that National could get away with a lot of the things that, you know, were kind of walked the line with Stephen Joyce. And a real kind of hero's journey coming back from 2002, and 46% in your fourth term is just unbelievable. We haven't seen anything, we clearly haven't seen anything like it before in MMP. Jacinda and Labour winners. She picked up about 15% or 13 at least percent of the electorate. She could still be the Prime Minister. We can get into that later. The whole party feels re-energised. The Greens, will count it as a win in the same way that you do when you sort of step onto the curb and then step up to get something and a bus rushes past. the kind of tangible relief from that party. And they'll be getting in, new and talented people. So, there is a good reason for all of them to be happy. Winston Peters, obviously.
Yeah. It's rare to have four parties that basically all, have reasons to be incredibly cheerful in context.
It's everyone had reason to have a nice time together.
I think you're right. Like, for people that do remember the 2002 election, you can't help but feel a little bit, I don't know if pleased is the right word for English, after that horror campaign that he had. And as he said during the election, I got back up, and he did so with, with a reasonable amount of grace. I think you're absolutely right about Jacinda. I think her speech was pitch perfect, in my opinion, and it wasn't a. I didn't really think of it as a concession speech. I thought it was graciously acknowledging that she didn't do as well as she could, but smartly also not counting herself out of the running. And I think that was an important message to send to not just Winston, but the supporters as well. Gareth Morgan, just your typical grumpy uncle. Him and Winston have so much in common in that regard. But I thought it was kind of cute too, the way he praised his supporters as early adopters and so on. I liked his t-shirt. James, again, he said it himself, who would have thought that he'd be happy if you'd told him this time 8 weeks ago that, this would be the outcome, but actually, you're right, he was absolutely rapt that they hadn't been wiped off the face of the earth. And 5.9 actually on election night is a good result for them, given, the tumultuous campaign that they had, that they weren't sitting at 4.9 and that they were definitely over the line. I think was an important victory for them. And then of course there was Te Ururoa's concession speech, which obviously was the saddest of the night. And it's hard to see a man like that, who has been a staunch tāne Māori, who is pretty fierce when he needs to be, reduced to tears over the election results. So pretty moving to watch him on election night, I thought.
Yeah, I found that those are the most kind of wrenching images. You see people lose quite frequently, but there's something about losing where it's not only your seat, but you got the sense that he felt the weight of his party's the fact that its future is now very much a question mark, that it has to do 3 years in the wilderness, and only one party's ever sort of successfully come back from that. You could sense that it was all on him at that time. And just as even a partisan would find it hard not to see something, to feel something in seeing Bill English's redemption, same goes with Te Ururoa. That was just a really, really tough place to be. And you saw that in the kind of intensity of he and Marama's emotions, even like the following morning. Yeah,
it's same with Hone too. Actually, you could tell with Hone's speech on the night. Obviously, he refused to concede, and he said that's just his style. He's not a person that concedes, but you could really hear the frustration in his voice, and I think that's because he knows that once you're out, the chances of getting back is hard. But when you've been basically pushed out twice, it's a very hard place to come back from. So that signals the end of the mana movement as well. But as I said on election night, as long as there's Māori are living and breathing and talking and arguing with each other, there's going to be another Māori political movement that rises up to take its place, no doubt.
I mean, the problem is that the Māori Party was born out of the foreshore and seabed betrayal by Labour to its Māori MPs, including now Dame Tariana Turia. And you would obviously hope that there isn't any kind of, betrayal of Māoridom of that same scale that would prompt the sort of backlash which resulted in the Māori Party again. So it is difficult to see what kind of circumstances would kind of prompt another successful Māori Party in the near term. I think it might have been Scott Campbell said on the Hui on. Is it the Hui?
Yeah.
Yeah, said, these things are cyclical. There was Mana Motuhake before the Māori Party, but we probably won't see anything for a number of years.
Yeah, it'll take for there to be some sort of flashpoint issue for that to happen. I just think in terms of the Māori Party, on the Hui we do stories every week about, a child who goes to the doctors 50 times is eventually, in a year, is eventually sent to a specialist at Starship, at Waikato Hospital actually, is turned away and has their appointment declined, and then eventually finds out that they've got stage 4 cancer. We do stories about people, tetraplegics living in cars, people having their kids taken off them, more Māori in state care than ever before, and those are the issues that Māori care about at the moment. Foreshore and seabed nowadays is almost a luxury issue, and Māori have moved on from it. And unfortunately, the Māori Party couldn't see that Māori have more pressing issues that they're concerned about at the moment. And I've seen in the last couple of days on Facebook, Māori voters described as beaten women returning to their abusive husbands, as dogs returning to eat their own vomit, as that it's a Māori saying, that one, as voting non-strategically. But I actually think that Māori did vote strategically on the weekend. They voted to get their Labour MPs in, and they voted to make sure that National didn't have an option in terms of coalition partners. And I think that's what we've seen. And having listened to Tariana on Radio New Zealand this morning, you guys would have seen the interviews with Marama over the weekend, obviously very angry and upset and lashing out. And having listened to Tariana this morning on Radio New Zealand, I feel like there's now some self-reflection that's going to start taking place, and people within the Māori Party and their supporters starting to look at the reasons why Māori have shifted their vote back to Labour. And of course, those 7 new Labour Māori MPs have a huge responsibility on their shoulders now, and Māori will be waiting and watching and expecting them to deliver, which I hope they are able to do, because there's some superbly talented young Māori within their ranks now.
Look, I think the fall of the Māori Party is a shame, and we saw with those pretty amazing interviews, I think, on Sunday and Monday. Have you guys seen that Star Trek episode where Kirk gets split in half by a faulty teleporter and gets split into good Kirk and bad Kirk, and one of them is sort of just Kirk's kind of human kindness and compassion, and the other one is like Kirk's aggression and anger. And it seemed sort of like that with Te Ururoa and Marama. And whether the Māori Party ever kind of got the balance right in Parliament in terms of the aggression towards National as the governing party, even in coalition, we started to see flashes of it this term, over the Kermadex, over the Resource Management Act, but that was really lacking in the previous 9 years. It seems really it seems a bit unfair and unkind, at this stage to kind of recall all of those Labour jibes at the Māori Party about being lapdogs of the government, which were very provocative. But I think actually what hurt the Māori Party and what hurt ACT in terms of its party vote is that, the traditional thing that hurts minor parties, they didn't do enough to distinguish themselves from the major party in government. Not just during the term, but even during the election. This is a relatively new idea that we have, that parties on the same end of the spectrum should be campaigning together and acting like friends and doing photo ops together. It's always been the exact opposite of that. ACT needs to get votes off people who would otherwise be voting National, not attacking Labour and the Greens. The Māori Party, needed to be showing people that it wasn't just an appendage of National, and
it's exactly what happened to the Alliance in terms of their relationship with Labour, and even New Zealand First. And was it 2008 that they got turfed out of Parliament altogether? Like, it's a really hard. It's a balancing act when you're one of those minor parties to maintain your identity and your brand, and those larger parties have a responsibility to manaaki their coalition partners, and National simply didn't do that well enough with the Māori Party. People were worried about te ture whenua Māori. I've spoken to people that were door knocking in the Waiariki electorate, and the feedback they kept getting was that people were really concerned about that te ture whenua Māori reform, and the reality is that in a tangible sense, more Māori would probably be affected by those reforms than by foreshore and seabed. So I think, and this is not to disrespect Tamati at all, but in some ways the vote even wasn't necessarily for Tamati as a person, it was against those reforms. And then of course you had the Kermit X, the Ngāpuhi settlement being pulled off the table, homelessness, all the rest of it. And in response we saw policies coming out like iwi Rail and iwi Bank, which for ordinary Māori probably seemed like folly, really.
At the same time, I don't think the Māori electorates are any less guilty than the general electorate of banking gains, in the sense that if you look at whānau ora, that's a pretty significant program, over the past six to 9 years. But the Māori Party did do a bad job of selling its successes.
That's the thing, they haven't told the story of whānau ora well enough. I think we hear about whānau ora a lot, but there's not, transmitting the success stories of whānau ora hasn't happened well enough, I think.
That's right. And, if the Māori Party had actually gone out there effectively and said, well, look at all of our critics, look at Willie Jackson, look at Hone Harawera, well, they're actually all whānau ora providers. And, that's how much buy-in there is to this project. But, there was, coming back to good Kirk, bad Kirk, I think the Māori Party always did sort of hide its light under a bushel a bit. They always seemed like a little abashed, not really, grandstanding. And I think they kind of took the whole Kumara doesn't sing of its own sweetness a little too far, and they relied on the fact that people back at the marae and people in the far reaches of their electorates who weren't doing so well all the time would just hear about the good work they were doing somehow organically, and it never happened.
I've come up with a really good segue. Do you want to hear it? So, it wasn't just like Te Ururua and Marama Fox whose political careers in Parliament have ended this term. There was also Peta Paraone from New Zealand First, Joe Hayes, is it? Well, what's the the Māori girl from New Zealand First, the former hairdresser.
This is good.
It's good. It's a work. It's still going. Wait for it.
It's like New Zealand.
David Clendon
yes.
from the Greens.
Oh yeah.
That went nicely.
And Denise Roche, which brings me to Auckland Central, which brings me to the swing between the Auckland seats, because for a while there it looked like Nikki Kay might be out the door that night, didn't it?
It's true.
Did you see what I did there?
Yeah.
It was long, I know. I needed help to get it there.
Yeah, I know, but it's the journey, not the destination. But I still feel a sense of relief and excitement now we're here.
Nikki Kay managed to hold on to Auckland Central, but there was some swings from Labour to National, wasn't there?
I mean, the Centrals were basically all swaying hard to Labour, which makes Nikki Kay's holding the seat all the more impressive against the backdrop of the party vote swinging so hard. But the fact that Auckland overall was part of the swing toward national.
The party vote, yeah.
Yeah, in the party vote, even in west and south Auckland, which is it's kind of extraordinary when you think about that Auckland has been the epicentre of so much of the kind of very pregnant social issues and housing issues that have been the storyline of the past 3 years, that National is still the strength of their brand, how they articulate it, was able to do that in this climate is, one of the sort of most extraordinary achievements of a selection. Ben, you've got a theory on that?
Well, yeah, so there was a piece published on Stuff by Phil Quinn, the former Labour Party press secretary and now sort of apostate of the party, one of its harshest critics. He put down that swing. He said there was a correlation in suburbs with a high essentially Asian population. There was more of a swing towards national, so electorates like New Lynn and out east,
Mount Roskill,
and he thought that was because of the sort of Chinese sounding names debacle with Labour, their anti-immigration policy, that they alienated those New Zealander kind of communities. I'm not convinced by that. I think that there is a firm bias in recent immigrant communities towards the government of the day, whoever that is. That seemed to be the case under Labour. It's the case under National, and a lot of it reflects culture. Actually, that was my only point.
But National also it was a great one, and you looked like you had another one. Like I really believed you when I saw your face.
It felt like there was going to be a follow-up until just that very last minute. What about Christchurch? Is this... We've seen a lot of electorates swing back to Labour. Is this people have just had a guts full of waiting for Christchurch to get fixed, or...?
Jerry Brownlee's departure as earthquake minister has crippled National in Christchurch.
It's such a popular politician.
Just one for our Christchurch listeners. I think that's probably the case, isn't it? There was that kind of afterglow of the government's, strong leadership or perceived strong leadership, however you want to cut it, after the Christchurch earthquakes. There's a real sense of solidarity down there, and there were also a few population changes by area that helped National a little, and that helped Nicky Wagner win Christchurch Central, I think, for the first time ever for National. And what we're seeing is a reversion to the mean as the kind of baseline heroism of the national government sort of returns to normal. And so Duncan Webb, a good win for him, highly regarded. He's a lawyer, used to be the privacy commissioner, didn't he? Mm. Was he something like that?
No idea.
It feels like the kind of thing you'd know and not us.
Yeah.
My cousin Nook Korako managed to hold on to his seat in the Port Hills. Well done, Nook. And my other cousin on Matawa's side, Rino Tirikatene, I think he actually increased his majority.
Matidia, 2 days late surge.
Yeah. That's right. But it was interesting to see Matidia come up to number 2. And in some ways it was even more fascinating in the Māori seats, is looking at who is coming in at number 2. And Matidia obviously got a bit of support there and managed to pip old Meitare from the Māori Party, who was an excellent candidate, actually. So, yeah, there you go. What else should we talk about, whānau? Bill's redemption, Jacinda's result. What will Winston do?
What will Winston do?
I feel like it's just sitting there.
Can we get Toby on the line?
At us. down a long driveway in Whananaki. And what do you reckon, Annabelle? Have you got a vibe yet on? I mean, he's very good at wrong footing you and at kind of sending like multiple different signals.
Yeah, I just don't think that that it's necessarily done and dusted, and that it's a given that he will go with National. But it's been fascinating over the last couple of days what's happened, like Wayne Eagleson resigning. I immediately thought of that superannuation leak, because we know that the 3 people in National that knew were Bennett, Tolley and Wayne Eagleson, and I can't help but wonder if he's like a sacrifice on the altar of Winston to show that, they're prepared to do whatever it takes, even if he's not necessarily personally responsible for the leak, but just, showing Winston that they're prepared to go.
It very much felt like a gesture, like a true like a sacrifice, like please, Winston,
like when your cat leaves the fantail at your back door.
Dump the body at the water's edge of the high tide and and when it washes away, Winston can come back over and get it. No, look, Eagleson was going to go whatever the case. I think he's probably been pining for John Key for the last few years. So
Will he be his caddy?
He was he was persuaded to stay. I think he had always tied his career to Keys. So there was no question that he was going to leave after the election. The question, though, of why it wasn't publicly announced now, that could have been something to do with clearing the decks for Winston. I think it's very unlikely that Wayne was involved in those leaks. No. He's not that sort of guy. He's actually a very straight shooter.
What about Bennett, who's today been talking about how she's very comfortable not being Deputy Prime Minister and isn't involved in the sort of those senior team doing the negotiations?
Yeah, look, well, as we know, Bennett's office has a history with leaks. Yeah. So whether she was involved or not, and we don't have any evidence that she was, I think that it would have been a bad idea to have her on the negotiation team with Peters for that reason.
She'll be serving the apple crumble paninis, I think. It's been fun, I have to say, the last couple of days watching the way the National Party are kind of crawling around Winston, like Stephen Joyce and oh no, I'll be making cups of tea, and Paula and her, it's fine, I'll be slutting it out and all of that stuff.
Well, it's very interesting that, because obviously the presumption is National with about, 10 seats more than Labour and about 5 seats more than Labour and the Greens right now, that they will be forming the government. And so you can see New Zealand First really kicking back against that. So, everyone who rings up New Zealand First for background is just getting a tirade about the National Party. And, there's these insiders talking about how the National Party tried to force Winston out of Northland. They tried to destroy the New Zealand First. The leaks are being brought up again. Winston Peters reacted badly to Bill English calling him a maverick yesterday, which really seems to be spoiling for a fight. So whether this actually indicates that there is a 50-50 chance, as the insiders are saying, or whether it indicates that New Zealand First are desperately trying to create a bidders market for National.
But surely it is a bidders market. They're going to be extraordinary sort of once-in-a-generation type deals on the table for him, because both sides are so hungry for the, I think even more so than in 2005. National are only 2 terms out of power and Labour had 2. There's something about the urgency of a 4th term, that glittering prize with a Prime Minister who, hasn't actually won an election, even though he's kind of won this, versus Labour, who have got to think, if they irrespective of the revival under Ardern, that the sense that they'll have maybe 1 or 2 MPs total who've ever been in government by the time a 4th term rolls around, and just how sort of shaky you get at the free throw line when you're that long. When winning's been that, they'll become like the Warriors.
He's in an awkward position because he knows that, a coalition of 61 does not make a very stable government, but he also knows that a vote for New Zealand First was not a vote for the status quo, it was a vote for change. So he's got a whole lot of stuff that he has to weigh up. And, if you look at it on policies like Jenna Lynch did last night, it does seem that he has far more in common with Labour. will he want to be in bed in a fourth-term national government? There's nothing very sexy about a fourth-term government, I would have thought, in terms of the longevity of his own party, and I don't know how much he cares about that, because I don't know if this is going to be his last election or if he plans to continue on, and if he wants to see New Zealand First have a long future. Those are all of the things that he's going to be having to weigh up in his head. So I still think it's anyone. It's still very much on the table, and I think it's right that it will come down to those sort of legacy issues like Northport and those sorts of things, rather than will he get to be the Minister of Trade, or will he get to be the Minister of beverages and cheese and crackers and stuff like that.
I agree. I mean, while the working assumption seems to be that the simplicity of a national New Zealand First government makes it far more likely, I do think that that policy alignment and the had enough, and the level of kind of rancor towards the government, even if some of it was kind of posturing, it just seems like if you look at 3 or 4 big things that New Zealand First could demand that wouldn't completely rupture your policy program, it seems to work better with Labour and the Greens, and the fact that he's expressed this historical enmity towards the Greens, it doesn't seem to be there to the same extent anymore. He can still kind of pat them on the head and keep them down into a pretty kind of a pretty junior position in any coalition due to that just immense weight of power that he has.
And I think too that in this election the specials will be absolutely critical, and 1 or 2 more seats for the left bloc will make a huge difference, I think. And
which is near inevitable.
That's incredibly important, because Winston has more experience, partially because of the way he constructs his lists and recruits his candidates, of having people flake out on him, desert him, get fed up with him. We saw the mass defection in 1996 where Jenny Shipley just kept half of his caucus in her government and dispatched with him. He had Brendan Horan leave in the 2011 to 2014 term. He's had huge problems with it. Just recently, of course, he demoted Richard Prosser, and then Prosser was in the paper, the day before the election and the day after the election, running him down. So Peters is probably more wary of his caucus than any other leader in Parliament. He'll be really, really careful about going in with only a 1 or 2 or 3 seat buffer, because there is always, look, if I was national, I'd be eyeing up Shane Jones, Stuart Nash from Labour, make him foreign minister. You could actually have one of these really patchwork sort of coalitions like 96, and then you wouldn't need Winston Peters. Now, I don't think National are looking at that, but Winston will not be blind to that possibility.
Can I just say, just touching again on the Māori Party and the Greens result, and I think it's something you've written about, but I haven't actually had the chance to read the article yet. But, there's been, even during our election night coverage at 3 the other night, lots of the commentators in the green room were talking about, what a wasted opportunity it is that the Greens have never gone into government with National, and it's something they should seriously consider. But I think, the Māori Party is an example of what happens when you abandon the ideals and the wants and desires of your key support base to take that pragmatic approach. And so I think the Greens have been wise, and obviously it's come at a huge personal sacrifice for them. Who wouldn't want a nice ministerial position after all those years on the opposition benches? But I think in terms of the longevity of the party, it's been the smart move. And I think if the Māori Party had set it out in 2014, created a bit of distance and space between themselves and National, and had sent clearer messages about who they would be prepared to go into coalition with, being more open and less scathing of Labour, then we might have seen a different result on the night.
Well, that's kind of what I wrote about. I mean, I think it's really sad, because I think that, what is the point of being? Obviously there are things you can achieve, in Parliament despite not being in government. Perhaps less as a list MP than an electorate MP, but the whole point of being there is to get into government, and the Greens' kind of lack of inability to even have a plausible relationship with National is the reason that despite only having 2 less MPs at New Zealand First, no one's talking about them. They could even very easily end up with the same number of MPs after specials are counted, and
still just get an insulation scheme.
Yeah,
like they always do.
Absolutely, and
Pink bats.
That's buy shares and take bats right now. But I mean that's kind of like that is the sort of the weird sort of irony of MMP, in that it gives voice to all these kind of narrower / minority interest parties, gives them seats at the table, but then whenever they actually take the plunge and do join governments, even if as in the Māori Party's case, they joined willingly, like they weren't necessary to pass legislation. So everything they got was a pure upside win. No one's, this is what I wrote, was that no one's suggesting, I think no one could plausibly suggest that Māori would have been better off without them there. I think everything they got, you could argue about where they emphasised, and particularly, I think you were absolutely right to say that they didn't create distance between them. They weren't critical enough of National. In fact, David Seymour, I would say, was probably the most critical of National from within that coalition on various issues. But the fact remains that it does seem that minor parties, when they do join up with a major party, there's an explosion, and it does damage the major party to an extent. But they always come back. They're forever. Of the sort of 11 minor parties which have been part of various coalitions, that have come into Parliament, 6 of them have been part of coalitions. 4 of them are now no longer in Parliament at all. They just get obliterated by proximity.
And I think too the whole idea that you can't really achieve anything in opposition. For me personally, I think one of the greatest Māori legislative achievements that we've seen over the past 9 years was Louisa Wall's gay marriage legislation, and she did that from the opposition benches, and it's something that we can feel internationally proud about. And if you don't believe in opposition, then that you can make change from the opposition, well, what's the point of Parliament? You might as well not have an opposition at all. So I think that the importance of being in opposition shouldn't be undervalued I think.
That's true. And I wasn't meaning to imply that there was nothing that could be achieved.
No.
But after 27 years, surely it just weighs on you. You want the ball.
One go. One little run. One little run with the ball.
You've got to recognise that when people are saying, why don't the Greens just focus on, their core purpose, which is the environment, and not on left-wing economics and social policy, that's just a mistake about who the Greens are and where they came from. The Greens are a left-wing, redistributive, socially liberal environmental party. They're not just one of those things. And when people talk about their core base, well, when you get down to it, it's their membership, and their membership are virulently left-wing. I mean, there's no argument about that. And that's not a bad thing or a good thing. That's just a characteristic of that party. And if you asked them to be purely environmentally focused or purely environmental business focused, that would be a different party.
It would. And that's kind of, again, what I wrote today was that the people asking for that tend to not be part of the Green Party, and people who are in the Green Party would absolutely, there would be no Green Party at the end of the term, probably wouldn't be a Green Party during the term if they were ever to even contemplate it in any serious way. And these parties are democracies, themselves. So, it certainly massively decreases their leverage, but I don't see that there's any other option for them.
We talked to Martin Davidson about that on the weekend, because there has been a lot of commentary around the Green Party needing to stick to environmental issues and cut out the social justice shtick, like, mending the safety net and all of that. And the point she made was that if our taiao, if our environment, if our awa, our rivers are unwell, the people are unwell. And if the people are unwell, the awa and the taiao and all of that stuff is unwell. So you can't have one without the other. And I thought that was a nice, simple way of summing up their approach around that stuff as well.
The other thing, just to go back to Winston, the one option that has been canvassed a little is that he remains on the crossbenches and that he doesn't support either party in government, or he abstains from confidence and supply.
Is that a minority government?
So he'd allow a minority government to form. But one thing we have to remember, and this also is applicable when people are talking about, he'll have to go with the biggest party, is that MMP, we're making up the rules as we go along. It's still only 20 years old in New Zealand, well, 21 years. In 2005, constitutional law professors took to the airwaves to say that it was literally impossible to have a government where you would have a foreign affairs minister who was not part of cabinet and not bound by cabinet collective responsibility. They were like, it just can't happen. And
They're such a cheerful bunch.
And what happens with MMP and with Parliament is that things happen and the conventions change. So in the past, a crossbenches arrangement would have been basically a matter of impotence. You just sit on the crossbenches, abstain on confidence and supply, let a minority party govern, and then you would basically have a veto over anything that they tried to do outside the budget which you didn't like. Now, that probably won't do for Winston because he needs a legacy in this term. This is his final term on all likelihood. He wants things to happen. On the other hand, he may not want to do them himself. You know, he does seem pretty tired with the whole sort of Parliament thing. He may not want to be Minister of Regional Development. He might want to strike a deal where he says to National Labour, I'll support your budget, and in that budget you've got to move Auckland's port to Northland. And I don't care how you do it, dispatch Simon Bridges to do it, or David Clark, or Phil Twyford, and just bring me the plan, and then I'll vote for your budget. And that would actually suit Winston's style of government perfectly.
Okay, so let's finish on just picking an outcome. The next podcast we'll have Toby back safely ensconced in this seat and probably be a hell of a lot better as a result.
Well, since me and Ben absolutely nailed it with our predictions last week, we might as well nail it again.
So a month's time, I'd like you to nail whether we'll know who our Prime Minister is and who it will be.
I would say that in a month's time we will know, and I suspect it will be Bill English.
Yes, in a month's time we will know, and it will be Jacinda Ardern.
Same.
Ka pai. Download us and all of that stuff. Where do they find us?
The Spinoff.
At the Spinoff.
Gone By Lunchtime on iTunes. Got to keep beating caucus.
Yeah.
That's the main thing we live for is the bitter rivalry, crosstown rivalry between caucus and Gone By Lunchtime.
The real enemies of democracy.
Absolutely.
In this country.
Those guys are,
coming after you, Guyon. Coming to get you.
Thank you.
Ka kite.
Talofa lover, I'm Madeline Chapman, editor at The Spinoff. If you have the means, consider supporting our high-quality journalism by becoming a Spinoff member. Sign up now at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
Do you find it hard staying optimistic with all the financial news in the media? I'm Bernard Hickey, and on my podcast, When the Facts Change, I'm here to help you navigate the ever-changing landscape of economics in Aotearoa. So join the conversation every Friday on When the Facts Change, brought to you by the Spinoff Podcast Network in partnership with KiwiBet.
The Spinoff Podcast Network.